Welcome to True Talk on WMNF 88.5 with Ahmed and Samar. On today's program, we're going to be discussing a new report, an explosive report that says that the Israeli government under Netanyahu has been funding criminal and terrorist groups like ISIS in Gaza. They've been arming them in an effort and a strategy to undermine Hamas and cause mayhem in the Gaza Strip, and encourage them to do criminal activities like looting aid, etc. We'll have an expert that wrote an article about that to discuss that. We also, Summer and I are going to be talking about the U.S. ambassador's to Israel, Mike Huckabee's latest crazy statements. So I think Summer, my co-host, is with me on because we're both actually doing this show live, but we're in two separate locations. Hello, Summer.
Hello, Ahmed. How are you?
Sabah al-khair and good morning.
It's not morning. Whenever I
Oh,
say good
yeah,
morning, you get at me. So, see,
that's
you were
true.
right. Ahmed, before we start, I think we should thank our listeners for being so generous to True Talk and their support. I think we beat our goal. And really, thank you from the bottom of my heart for believing in the mission of WMNF and for believing in Ahmed's efforts and my efforts to bring to you voices that usually you will not be listening to if you listen to mainstream media. So thank you again, and keep supporting WMNF. I think, Ahmed, you were just listening to NPR and they were talking about the government's attempts to take the little money that they give to this public service, whether WMNF or other stations like ours. So I hope people will keep really supporting WMNF and True Talk, whether they agree with us or not, but it's important to keep our voices. And Ahmed, I don't know if you're following Twitter because that's where you mainly can get the news from the Arab world, but are you noticing what is happening in Algeria and Libya and Tunisia? Are
Right,
you-
there's a convoy called the El Sumud convoy that is from Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, and going into Egypt, attempting to cross through Egypt to make it to the Rafah border to basically break the siege and saying following the heroic example of the flotilla ship, which we'll probably also discuss, that attempted to do that. That was seized, and its passengers, activists were on board, were kidnapped by the Israeli government. They were also trying to do whatever effort they can to break the siege through maritime by going to the Gaza coast to send a message to the world that the siege has to be broken. They had some aid, so this convoy is also trying to do the same thing, but they're being stopped in Egypt. I guess they're facing problems there.
The convoy, the caravan, the land convoy has not crossed from Libya to Egypt yet. But the ones who arrived by plane from Holland, from Italy, from Spain, from Turkey, also Algeria and Tunisia, and I know there some from Japan have landed. I think nobody suspected at the Egyptian airport that these people coming from Japan are coming for the same reason and they're not tourists. But there are many lawyers who I was listening to yesterday on a space on Twitter saying that they were deported after coming to Egypt. After landing at the airport, they stayed about 3 hours and they were all deported. Some have managed to get in, but I don't know if the ones at the border between Libya and Egypt will be allowed in. But what is happening, Ahmed, I think, and that's the significance of it. Of course, nobody is really, highlighting this on Western media, but of course on social media, is the fact that the Arab masses are in huge numbers are supportive of the Palestinians. I mean, the people who are marching are in their mid 30s. Some are in their 20s, some are in their 40s. These are people who have witnessed diplomatic relations between Israel and some Arab countries. And they're not people who grew up knowing about or living the Arab-Israeli conflict, or like myself. So it means that no matter how much, whether Israel or Arab countries or the Zionist lobby spend in order to erase the Palestinian cause from the hearts and minds of people, it's failing. This is the significance of what is going on, because people are saying, you know, that you will be prevented from crossing to Egypt or from getting to Gaza. No, they want to show the world that we do care about Gaza, that no matter what you do, how much you spend, we do care about this cause because it is a human rights cause. It's a just cause. And that's the significance, I think, Ahmed, of what is
Right.
going on. You
And
follow US news more than I do, and you watch TV more than I do. Anything of this mentioned on our mainstream
no,
media?
no, not much is mentioned about it. It's kind of being, I mean, there was some mention about the sea convoy, the flotilla, um, to try to break the siege, and they're basically making fun of Greta, the climate change activist that's famous for climate change, and she was on board the ship, and even President Trump commented on about her, saying, you know, what do you make of it? And even Lindsey Graham had tweeted about her, saying, I hope, you know, which was like a veiled threat. I hope Greta and her friends know how to swim, meaning, like, you know, the ship is going to come under attack. And this would not be the first time. Previous flotillas have been attacked by Israelis. This was attempted before. One of the worst attacks was the Mavi Marmara ship that left Turkey, and Israeli commandos boarded and killed. I forgot the number of people, activists on board that were killed by these commandos, and it strained relations between Turkey and Israel for many years until now. It hasn't really fully recovered. So yeah, there's not much mention of this on television. A lot of this stuff is censored, and if anything, whenever they post things or talk about it, they always put in the context of, oh, these people just hate Jews. This is anti-Semitism. And it's so frustrating when the mainstream media constantly depicts these efforts by activists that these are just some Jewish haters, when in fact, many of them themselves are Jewish. And they reject what the Israeli and these radical Zionists are attempting to do, that, you know, eradicate the indigenous Palestinians off their land. And, in some of the comments that we'll hear later, maybe we play clips from what Mike Huckabee, the U.S. ambassador to Israel, had said, that he also was just saying, Israel is so small, such a small amount of land. These Muslim majority countries have so much land. Why don't they take the Palestinians? Why don't they create a Palestine in their areas? Which is ridiculous, to think about this. So he also believes the same thing, that, of eradicating Palestinians off their land, which, again, this amounts to ethnic cleansing. They belong on that land. You can't just say, well, why don't other people take them? He's from Arkansas. Would he give up Arkansas for someone else and just say, yeah, I'll gladly just be forced to migrate? Would you give part of America to anyone else? No, you wouldn't. And on top of that, this is not any place. This area is considered to be sacred and holy lands by Muslims, just as they are by Christians and Jews. So you can't just say, oh, well, Israel will take all of this land just for themselves and no one else. So it's really frustrating to see that. But on our show, like we said, we'll have Dave DeCamp, who's actually joining us now. Can you introduce Dave?
Yes, Ahmed, I'm very pleased to say that we have with us today Dave DeCamp. He is a news editor for antiwar.com. He also has a very interesting show. He's the show of Anti-War News with Dave DeCamp, and you can find him on Twitter. Thank you, Dave, for joining us. I was reading some of the very interesting pieces that you have written, a number of them, but I am curious. I would like you actually to talk about this idea that Israel wants to control the aid that goes to Gaza, and they thought that they can do a good job by finding some American company to do it. The American company refused when it found out that it is a totally controlled operation by the military. So can you give us a little bit background before we talk about the gist of your writing, which is the the Israel arming ISIS-like gangs in Gaza to be responsible for the aid. What is the situation in Gaza now when it comes to food and aid and the dire need for it? And what is this plan that Israel is doing?
Yeah, sure. First, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. So, in recent weeks, really starting at the end of May, this company this foundation that calls itself the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is based in the U.S., started operations in Gaza, and they have these aid distribution points. There's about 4 of them set up at this point, 3 in the south and 1 near the Net Zerim corridor, which separates northern Gaza from the rest of Gaza. And the security is manned by American contractors, essentially American private mercenaries. And for the starving, desperate Palestinians, many of them have to walk miles to try to get a box of food here. And what we see from the reports on the ground is that it's pretty meager supplies, and a lot of the supplies need to be cooked, which requires clean water and things like that people don't have. But we're seeing people still make these trips. And you mentioned some companies that were involved step back, and there was one consulting firm that was apparently involved that since the aid operation started and it's become a total disaster, that the consulting group left. And right before it started, the director of the company resigned and said that he couldn't see how this could be done following humanitarian principles. And then they found themselves a new director, a guy named Reverend Johnny Moore, who's a Christian Zionist, of the same ilk of Mike Huckabee, who has taken over this company now. And I do believe this fits into Israel's ethnic cleansing plan for Gaza. It's a way to lure Palestinians who are starving and desperate to these different parts of Gaza. And I mean, we've seen the videos. It's just these huge crowds of people swarming the sites because the supplies run out quickly. So people try to get there early. And now we're seeing daily massacres of Palestinians walking to these sites, massacred by the Israeli military. So it's really just horrific situation. And it's part of Israel's control of Gaza and the terror that they're inflicting on the civilian population.
So who is the Abu Shabab group? Which, if you look at what is coming out of Israel, the Israeli media, some of it they say, the gangs, or actually Hamas is looting the aid. And this is one of the reasons why we had to resort to some clans, they call them clans, in Gaza to be in control. Who is the Abu Shabab group, Dave?
Yeah, from what I gather, from what I can tell, it's essentially a group of criminals, and some of their members have ties to ISIS. According to Israeli sources, at least one leader in the group actually fought with ISIS against Egyptian security forces in the Sinai. So this is not a group of good people here. And so if you remember last year, in 2024, there was a lot of looting happening. And at the time, the UN, and the aid group said that Abu Shabab and his crew were the responsible for most of the looting. And he actually spoke to the Washington Post, and he acknowledged, he said, yeah, we take a little from the trucks. He tried to say that they weren't taking food or things like that, but he essentially admitted that they were looting. And we saw reports in Israeli media at the time that Israel was essentially allowing them to operate essentially letting them loot the trucks. And in some cases, Hamas or the Gaza police force would try to stop them, and Israel would launch airstrikes against them. So that was last year. And then after the short-lived ceasefire, this group started popping up again. And now it seems like it's kind of more organized. And then we learn from Israeli, first revealed by Israeli opposition figures, that Netanyahu is arming what they call ISIS-linked militias. And now Abu Shabab, he has this big social media presence. He's trying to portray himself as a Palestinian leader, like an alternative to Hamas, and he's denying that he is collaborating with Israel, yet he's operating in Israeli-controlled areas, and he's received guns from Israel, which we've learned. And now we're seeing in recent days, it's kind of tough to figure out exactly what's happening on the ground, but Hamas is fighting against them. They're fighting against Hamas. And I think this is really the strategy here is, divide and conquer, and just kind of stoke this inner Palestinian conflict.
But isn't this dangerous, Dave? Because, for instance, during the height of the PLO and the first Intifada, that's what Israel did, was ignore that there is a group of people in Gaza gaining momentum, which ended up having the Hamas group that did not exist a few years ago or a few decades ago. It ignored the fact that they are gaining popularity and strength and getting into the armed resistance. Israel didn't learn a lesson, or they don't care. They just want to divide and rule, like you said. But at the same time, Dave, people are dying. I mean, the Palestinians who are going to these stations, and like you said, they have pasta, and they had to grind the pasta to turn it into some flour to make bread. So it's not like they're getting something worthy to die for, but they are still going and shooting them. So I don't understand. This is like diabolic. This is mentally sick what Israel is doing. And I know that our Western media are not covering it, but eventually people see what is going on and may react to it, as we have seen here in the U.S. in several areas, violently. I can't understand the logic, Dave. Maybe you can help me and help our listeners understand.
I mean, it is tough to understand. As you said, this is really so evil, what's happening on the ground right now. And as you mentioned, I mean, this was the thing that Netanyahu's critics in Israel brought up, was they compared it to him helping prop up Hamas in the years leading up to October 7th by, allowing or facilitating, really, and actually asking Qatar to send them cash. And now we see him, trying a similar strategy here. I mean, I do believe for Netanyahu and his government and many people in Israel as well, according to the polling, like the goal is, I mean, Netanyahu said this explicitly, the goal is ethnic cleansing. They want all the Palestinians out. What he calls the Trump plan now, because Trump has said he wants the U.S. to take over, and that plan involves expelling all the Palestinians. So I do believe that's the goal. So to inflict as much chaos and suffering as possible, I just think it is what they're trying to do. And this kind of whole aid scheme, I believe the Israeli government would have been happy to let all the Palestinians starve to death in Gaza. But because it's 2025 and everybody is seeing this on their phones, and the U.S. still has to, there's certain things you just can't do in 2025, and that involves just starving a whole civilian population. But so to get around that, they set up this whole aid fund. But they're still just essentially, it seems to me that they're just ensuring that life is as miserable as possible for the Palestinians on the ground, so they will want to leave. The question is, I mean, no countries are willing to facilitate the ethnic cleansing or saying that they'll take them in. But this just goes on every day. I mean, I really don't, I don't have an answer of like what exactly, where this is going to lead, because it does seem unlikely that Netanyahu is going to get his way, but at the same time, it doesn't seem like this is going to end. And no matter what he does, the U.S. continues to give him the weapons and the aid to do all this.
If you're just joining us, this is True Talk on WNF. We're speaking to Dave DeCamp about an article he wrote for antiwar.com, where he's an editor, and it's titled Israeli Military and Israeli-Backed Gang Shoot Aid Seekers in Gaza, Killing 14. So I think Avigdor Lieberman is a former minister in Israel who had attacked Netanyahu, and one of the people that exposed this funding and arming of groups with ties to ISIS, who are being armed by Israel and the Netanyahu government. One of the things that you often hear from American politicians is that they have to disarm Gazans and they have to get rid of the terrorists. Would you say that this group that's being armed by Israel in Gaza is a different kind of terrorist, or?
Yeah, I mean, especially the ones who do have links to ISIS. From what I can just gather myself, just by reading all the different sources on this guy, Abu Shabab, to me, he seems like a criminal. You know, he was in jail for drug trafficking. He was involved in looting trucks and selling aid to people. Seems like he's just looking to make money and gain power. But on the other hand, and we've seen Hamas sources actually say that the members of this gang include radical Salafist Muslims, and that's Hamas saying this. So yeah, it's certainly, that's why, I believe, I mean, this should have been front page news in every major U.S. newspaper. Isn't arming ISIS bad, or people linked to ISIS bad? Mm-hmm. So I asked this, I got a comment from the State Department about it, and I asked them for a statement, about this news that Israel's arming these ISIS-linked gangs, and asking if the U.S. was involved. And all they gave me back was two sentences. They condemned Hamas in the first sentence, and in the second sentence they said, we had nothing to do with this. We refer you to Israel. But the U.S. is completely implicated and involved, because the U.S. is the one who, according to Israeli media, is since October 7th has funded 70% of Israel's military spending, war-related military spending. And that doesn't just mean Gaza, that also means the West Bank, Lebanon, Syria, airstrikes in Yemen, and we've even seen some airstrikes in Iran. So, this is U.S. foreign policy in the region essentially repeating itself by arming, one group against the other. And yeah, you think there would be more outrage here in the U.S. about it.
After Avigdor Lieberman's attack on Netanyahu actually himself confirmed that they're arming. He admitted that Israel armed these Gaza gangs to drive lawlessness. And basically he thinks it's a strategy. And I think he said something like in a tweet, like, so what? This will spark, and he's basically saying that this will spark Palestinian infighting and save Israeli soldiers' lives. He's hoping that these groups would fight with Hamas. And yesterday there was a report in Middle East Eye that Hamas has killed 50 members of this Gaza gang that's armed by Israel. So it seems like, one, as an occupying force and what they claim to be, this democracy in the Middle East, arming gangs in the middle of a genocide is not, even if you don't view it as a genocide, but arming gangs in the middle of this chaos and, people that are displaced is very much criminal. Because, as an occupying force, you have some responsibility to the people you're occupying. So when it just strikes me as this is just another example of Israel violating international laws, and which leads to the death of more Palestinian people, not necessarily Hamas. Hamas has guns, they can protect themselves, but these civilians that are just caught in the middle of all of this.
Yeah, certainly is another example of Israel's violation of any kind of international law. And as you mentioned, the civilians get caught in between. The story that I wrote the other day, this was on, I believe, Monday. It's tough to keep track because there has been these daily massacres near the aid sites. But I believe it was Monday when the witnesses, the people who survived the attack, said you had the Abu Shabab gang on one side firing at them and the IDF on the other side. Apparently the gang members were trying to do some kind of crowd control of the people heading to the aid site, and they walked too close to them or started pushing away, and then they started firing. So yeah, it's the civilians getting caught in the middle of Israel, of Hamas, and of this gang. And again, I think it is clear that it is the goal to just make life as miserable as possible. And obviously, like for an occupying power, as you said, they are supposed to have responsibility for the well-being of the civilians. And obviously, that's something Israel has violated many years ago.
It's so obvious to any just lay observer what Israel's trying to do, just make things so miserable that people want to leave and flee, and for other countries around to accept these people, just to make it so horrific. The one thing they don't want to do is stop the bombing. And they keep using this excuse, oh, we need to get rid of Hamas. We need to uproot Hamas. We need to free the hostages. Or the excuse that Hamas is using these people as human shields. That's why they're killing so many. I mean, how long can they continue to use these examples in Washington and the State Department by these members of Congress to keep repeating what are basically debunked lies?
Yeah, I mean, especially at this point when Israel first broke the ceasefire in March. I mean, they were breaking it in different ways the whole time, but when they really restarted like the heavy bombing campaign on March 18th, in one day they killed like 400 Palestinians, and I believe the number, it was just horrific. It was like 200 children, and the State Department was asked, do you condemn this, this slaughter of children? And they said everything that happens in Gaza is the fault of Hamas. So that is the line, that there's just no responsibility for Israel, for the U.S., for any of the bloodshed that's happening in Gaza. It's just all Hamas. And unfortunately, it seems like enough people buy it, or enough people just don't care. It seemed like there's been a lot of momentum of people shifting away from this idea that the U.S. should support Israel. And I think in the long term, things are really going to change here in the U.S. because you look at the polling, and it doesn't matter your political persuasion. Younger people are more likely to be skeptical of this special U.S.-Israel relationship. But for now, I mean, with everything that's going on domestically here in the U.S., I mean, you don't really see, we've seen some Democrats, small groups of the progressive Democrats speak out, send letters and everything. But for the most part, we're just not really seeing the big push that would be needed to change things.
I mean, it seems like
Sorry, Ahmed, but I just want to, because you were raising a very important point, you and Dave, but because, Dave, I am a Palestinian. I have a feeling that this is what Israel is doing, and you may disagree with me, you and Ahmed, but maybe you wouldn't. I have a feeling that what they're doing there is creating a civil war. So the Hamas would be fighting Abu Shabab group, the citizens who are hungry, the Palestinians will be fighting both of them. And I think they are hoping that there would be kind of a mass revolt against Hamas and using the Abu Shabab. I don't know if you both agree with me, but I have a feeling that they are like planting the seeds of a civil strife, and where the people would come out. And we have seen some footage in the Arabic language on X saying, we're sick and tired of Hamas. You should have calculated this better. Yes, we are under occupation, but what you did on October 7 really is destroying our lives. So I have a feeling as a Palestinian, this is what Israel is doing. It's all planned. I don't know if you agree with me, either of you.
Yeah, I do think that's part of it. Again, kind of creating this strife and, just inter-Palestinian conflict. And there is a historical precedent for this. When was the election? 2006? And the U.S., the George W. Bush administration, they pushed Fatah, the PLO, essentially to launch a coup against Hamas after the election in Gaza, and that was what Israel then used to justify the blockade. So, yeah, there's precedent for something like that.
Yeah, I mean, Netanyahu himself said that the purpose is to create infighting, and Hamas did say they killed 50 of those fighters. Again, those gangs that are being funded and armed by Israel, so far they're just they're turning their guns on other Palestinians. They're not using those guns against Israel. And that's, I mean, I think you've been observing the region for a while, Dave. Is there any instances where ISIS actually attacked somebody other than Muslims?
I mean, when they took power, when they actually had their caliphate in Iraq and Syria, they were killing a lot of religious minorities and everything.
But it was also, I mean, well, okay, so religious minorities who are not Muslim, because there are religious sects within Islam, like Shia. They might have been killing Shia, but there are also other Muslims, I guess. They were not necessarily, I don't know, were they fighting the occupiers? Because, ISIS was also there in Syria, but they never actually turned their guns on Israel, for example.
Yes, that's right. They never did.
Some reports that, in fact, Israel treated some ISIS fighters at some point.
Yeah, and then, the other Al-Qaeda, because there was kind of a split. I mean, the Ahmed al-Shara, who leads Syria now, he was allied with Baghdadi before I think ISIS was officially created. And then there was a split between ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria a bit. And we do know that the U.S. and Israel funneled weapons to the Al-Qaeda guys. And, weapons certainly ended up in ISIS's hands as well. But, yeah, I mean, man, it is, you just look back on the history. And of course, ISIS could have never taken any power if the U.S. didn't invade Iraq, which just destabilized the whole region. So it's just like this cycle that just keeps repeating itself, it seems. But they certainly, the U.S. and Israel have a history of using these types of groups for their own agenda. And I mean, really, the reason why they wanted Assad out of Syria was because he was allied with Iran, essentially, and they could get weapons to Hezbollah through there. So yeah, it's definitely,
but Assad himself, I mean, not to digress, but Assad himself never threatened Israel either in his
true.
entire reign, despite the rhetoric and other things.
And Israel was launching airstrikes against Syria for years leading up to his downfall, and they never did anything back. And I think that might have been part of, in the later years I'm talking about, when he was really more allied with Russia. I think Russia didn't want any kind of conflict with Israel. But yeah, it's true. That's a good point.
I mean, is there, I don't know, is there a country around Israel that Israel has not attacked at this point? Because they seem like this is a frustrating thing that the people that defend Israel often say is that, Israel is this only democracy surrounded by all these savages and all these countries that want to kill them and destroy them. But the only country that is bombing everywhere, especially right now, in different areas, is Israel. They're bombed in Syria, they're bombing in Lebanon, they're bombing in Yemen, they're bombing in Iran. It's almost like they want some sort of wider war to expand. And now they're trying to pull the United States to bomb and attack and go to war with Iran for them. Netanyahu himself lobbied the U.S. government and pushed them. And other neocons that are, extreme Zionists also pushed the United States to go to war with Iraq over this issue of weapons of mass destruction which turned out to be a lie. So it's actually the other way around. And this is something that you often hear, is that every accusation from Israel is actually a confession that they're, instead of, saying, we're under threat by everyone, they're threatening everyone else. And whenever you have this conversation like we're having, people will just point at us and say, you guys are a bunch of anti-Semites. When no, this has nothing to do with Judaism or the Jewish people. It just has to do with what Israel is doing in the region.
Yeah, I mean, you look at Syria right now. So after Assad was overthrown, Israel invaded southern Syria and started taking more Syrian territory. And they launched these really heavy airstrikes, essentially to destroy what military equipment was left. And they're saying, that's because there's all these threats coming from Syria. Well, just recently, like 2 rockets were fired toward the Golan Heights, the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights. And that was the first rocket attack or first sort of attack from Syrian territory against Israeli-occupied territory in over a year. So they claim that there's this big threat from Syria, yet they invade, they bomb it constantly, and, nobody's hitting them back. So it is the whole narrative is kind of flipped on its head. And even in Lebanon now, I mean, they signed this so-called ceasefire deal with Hezbollah in November, but Israel's constantly violating it. And Hezbollah hasn't actually, there's been like, again, the same thing, like 2 rockets were fired once. Hezbollah said it wasn't them. So why do they justify continuing to occupy parts of southern Lebanon and launching airstrikes there and going in? They really are just on this tear right now. And as long as the U.S. keeps supporting Israel, it's going to continue. And you mentioned Iran. I mean, that's the big news now. Like, apparently the U.S. is expecting Israel to attack. And if Israel attacks, that could drag the U.S. into it. And I think the idea that the U.S., might get dragged into a war here. I think if Trump wanted to, he could end this threat of Israel attacking Iran, if he really wanted to. But it seems like he's using it for the nuclear negotiations. But it's just, the whole thing is just a mess. They're not going to be able to pressure Iran into giving up its nuclear enrichment program. That seems to be what the U.S. is trying to do now. But it's essentially that demand for for Iran to get rid of its nuclear enrichment program is essentially designed to make the negotiations fail. That's why we see Netanyahu say it, all the Iran hawks in the U.S., which is unfortunately like every Republican in Congress. So Trump is under a lot of pressure, essentially, to go to war with Iran.
Although his MAGA supporters, Dave, are not interested in wars, not want to go to war. But I want to shift the conversation to something interesting that you wrote, but also something very disturbing that happened. And I think Ahmed has clips if you want to play it, Ahmed, later on. It's up to you. But let me just remind our listeners, we're talking to Dave DeCamp, and he's a news editor for antiwar.com and has his own show. I'm not sure, Dave, where can people follow it? But I see you on Twitter.
The show is called Anti-War News. It's on YouTube, or you could listen to it where you download podcasts.
Okay, but I want to talk about our ambassador to the U.S. This guy is really something else, because you wrote that he is trying to keep Netanyahu in power, and I want you to talk about that. But also, 2 days ago, he made a statement where Ahmed and I, we were talking about it at the beginning, and shows either the guy is totally like radical or stupid and ignorant, because he wants the Palestinians to have a state somewhere on the vast Muslim countries. And at the end of the day, I am not a Palestinian because I'm a Muslim or a Christian. I am a Palestinian because I have a culture and ethnicity and language, and everything about me is Palestinian, which is different than being Egyptian or Saudi or Lebanese or Moroccan, and being a Pakistani or a Thai, and where are the Afghani. But I want you to talk about our ambassador to the U.S. and why is he trying to keep Netanyahu in power? Is this a U.S. policy, or he's acting on his own?
I believe this is the policy of this current Trump administration, but in a way, he's also acting kind of on his own ideological grounds. In 2008, when he was running for president, Mike Huckabee, who's a former governor of Arkansas, there was a recording of him saying that he doesn't believe there's there's no such thing as a Palestinian, essentially saying they're just Arabs, and they became Palestinians after Israel was founded. And he said in that conversation that look at all this land, and they could get a piece of Syria, Jordan, Egypt, and this is 2008. So I believe that he's not stupid, that he is very ideological, and it is his religious belief. He's a Christian Zionist who believes, and he said this himself, that God gave historic Palestine to the modern state of Israel, which for me as a Christian, as a Catholic, that's a heresy. But this is a strain of evangelical Christianity in the U.S. that has a lot of influence. But this is what his ideology is rooted in. And I believe that's one reason why he was working to prevent the dissolution of the Netanyahu government. The report said that he met with members of the ultra-Orthodox parties who were threatening to dissolve the government over the lack of a draft exemption law for the Haredi Orthodox Jews. and basically telling them that, you need a stable government, which is, really sounds like interference in another country's internal affairs. And so, his response to the report was, I wasn't trying to influence them, but he said that he told them, how the U.S. would view it as like destabilizing. And then, as you said the other day, he said, the U.S. is not, he said he believes it's no longer a goal of the U.S. government to work toward a Palestinian state. And I think that's been clear that that's the case for a while based on the U.S. actions over the past couple decades. But, him making it official like that, it's really giving no hope to the, if you're a Palestinian in the West Bank, in Gaza, and you hear these things, what hope do you have when you have this completely emboldened Netanyahu government expanding the settlements, committing genocide in Gaza, and their biggest backer, the United States, the one country that has the power to stop it, is saying things like that?
Ahmed, do you want to play the clip? Do you have it?
Yes. So this is a clip. It was an interview with Mike Huckabee on PBS NewsHour. Let me just see here.
You were asked about the U.S.'s policy and if the U.S. is no longer pursuing the goal of an independent Palestinian state, and you said, I don't think so. It's worth pointing out that a two-state solution has been a cornerstone of U.S. policy and diplomatic efforts in the Middle East for at least the last 3 decades. Is this a new U.S. policy that you're articulating here?
It's not so much a new policy, it's simply the pragmatic reality that right now there's just no appetite for it. There's no plans for it. Nobody's come up with a workable plan. One of the things that I admire most about President Trump, he's the ultimate pragmatist, and he has 2 questions that he poses for every decision. Will it work, and will it make things better? So the question is, if you created and imposed a 2-state solution in the midst of a post-October 7th world, would it work, and would it make things better? I'm not hearing anybody who can explain how it would work and how it would make things better. So I'm not saying it'll never happen. I'm not saying it aspirationally is not something that maybe people would love to see. But I'm simply saying that for the immediate future, for the time being, I don't hear anyone really going out there and saying that it ought to happen.
Well, whether it's in the near future or the distant future, I think the question is whether it's something the U.S. wants to work towards. In saying, I don't think so, you articulated a change to what's been the longstanding U.S. policy. Is that something you spoke to President Trump about, and does he agree with you?
It's not something we've had a conversation about, but if you go back to his first term, he never brought it up. It was simply not something that he was focused upon, because what he was really focused upon was a much bigger realignment of the Middle East. So he initiated the Abraham Accords, which I think were incredibly historic, and he invited the Palestinians to be part of that process. They refused. They walked away. They wanted no part of it. I think the president is poised to do something incredibly significant in his second term, and that would be a dramatic expansion of the Abraham Accords.
Well, sir, as you know, the Abraham Accords were meant to be a precursor towards normalization between the 2 largest economies in the region. That would be Saudi Arabia and Israel. And we've seen the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, say that there will be no normalization without an independent Palestinian state. So can there be normalization unless the U.S. is actively working towards a 2-state solution?
Well, I think that there certainly can be. And once again, it doesn't always mean that the Palestinian state is going to be right in the middle of Judea and Samaria. There are many questions to be raised about where would it be, how would it be formulated, how would it be governed.
Where else do we suggest it might be?
It's one thing to say we would, well, I said the French Riviera. France seems to really be just heavy on this whole idea.
Ambassador, all due respect, is that a real suggestion that you would forcibly displace hundreds of thousands of Palestinians to the French Riviera?
I would say it's about as real as saying that as long as the Palestinians are paying people to murder Jewish people, which they do, or to teach them from the time they're 6 years old that it is a wonderful thing to kill a Jewish person, and their families are rewarded with a pension or a park or a street named after them, you're probably not going to see this resolved. There has to be a cultural shift. But here's what I would also mention, and a lot of people don't think about this. Israel is a tiny little country. It's a sliver of land the size of New Jersey. Muslim-run countries have 644 times the amount of real estate than Israel does. So when I hear people say Israel just needs to give up some of the land, well, they've given up quite a bit. They've given up Gaza. That was a Palestinian state. That was a 100% Palestinian state. And it could have been Singapore, but Hamas turned it into Haiti. There has been such a disastrous economic problem that goes on in the Palestinian Authority.
Ambassador, setting aside the failures of the Palestinian leadership over the
Okay, if you're just joining us, this is True Talk on WMNF. I really don't know where to start, Dave, but how could this be representing the U.S. government and the U.S. State Department at a foreign nation, talking about ethnically cleansing part of the population to not even the not even to Muslim nations, but to the Riviera in France? I mean, this is a little bit too much.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It is like really absurd because, you know, these people were always kind of in the peripheral, like that have this ideology that Huckabee has and say things like this. But now he's actually the U.S. ambassador to Israel. And it's also like, you know, you have guys like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir in Israel. Now they're in two very senior positions of the Israeli government. Calling the shots, Ben-Gvir designing the prisons to you know, torture and starve inmates. So you really have kind of the radicals in charge. And yeah, I mean, I don't know, like, you know, when I cover this stuff.
This emboldens also true terrorists out there or fringe groups on either side to take this verbatim and start acting on it, I mean, like, you can use what he's saying to justify committing violence on both sides. It's very dangerous what he's saying. Plus, I mean, other than negating the culture, but also, Dave, he doesn't know that there is a vibrant Christian Palestinian population living with him in Jerusalem and all over Palestine and Israel. Like, what happens to these people? They go to live in a Muslim country, or he doesn't care, or there are only certain Christians that he like.
Yeah, they don't seem to ever be factored into the equation, the Palestinian Christian population. So, yeah, it's something a lot of American Christians aren't even aware that there's Palestinian Christians, even though they were played a very prominent role in like the early resistance and PLO and everything. But yeah, and as you said, this emboldens, you know, real terrorism, real violence against civilians, especially, you know, in the West Bank. This emboldens the Jewish settlers to keep terrorizing people, to drive them out of their homes. And this could, you know, we could see more attacks here in the U.S. As a result of this. This is always a risk when you're supporting such brutality overseas. And it's just, as I said earlier, you know, there's just no hope at this point. I mean, you know, I don't want to be too doom and gloom, but I'm just like, when I cover this stuff every day, I try to think of a way where we could go in a better direction, but it's just really hard to imagine with the current people in power. I mean, just today, the heritage minister, I forget his name, but he's the heritage minister in the Israeli government. He's a member of Ben-Gvir's Jewish Power Party. He says, we're going to take over Syria, we're going to take over Lebanon, we're going to take over the West Bank, take over Gaza. And again, these are members of the government, because there were always these kind of extremists, but this is like very serious stuff here. So yeah, I don't know where it's going to lead.
Do you think if our media were covering part of these stories like you cover, or Ahmed and I on WMNF cover, you think it would have made a difference? It would have created more pressure from the public on our representatives, at least at the Congress, especially looking at what is happening in Los Angeles and people getting so mad that the people are waving the Mexican flag. And I really don't have an opinion on that. But looking at our representatives and congressmen and women waving the Israeli flag inside the Congress, and nobody seems to connect the two or like be angry at one and not angry at the other. But do you think our media are really collaborators on this with this genocide and allowing this genocide to happen by simply not touching these issues, not covering it?
Yeah, I think definitely in a way. We have seen some critical coverage just because the brutality is it's just so horrific that like they have to cover some of it. But these kind of things are the inner workings of the Israeli government, of what's happening in Israel, of kind of the attitude. There's just a poll that says 64% of Israelis don't think there are no innocents in Gaza. And this is a place where half the population are children. And we see all the genocidal rhetoric from members of the government. I really think if that stuff was covered more, it would really make people question what we're supporting here. We have a new member from Florida, a new member of Congress, this guy, Randy Fine, who's, called for Gaza to run red with rivers of blood. I mean, this guy is really sick. And now he's a member of Congress, of the House. He won Mike Waltz's seat. He says Palestinianism is a disease. Again, like genocidal rhetoric from an actual member of the U.S. government. So yeah, how does that happen? How does someone like that get put in a position like that? So yeah, I think media coverage just has been completely lacking on really what's happening here. When you have, again, the government, Netanyahu, saying openly ethnic cleansing is the plan, it gets spun in a way that it doesn't sound as bad. They say, oh, voluntary migration, like it's this nice thing that they're going to do. Yeah, it's a big part of it, I think.
Very quickly, because they were running out of time, but let's say Israel bombs Iran. What do you think could happen? Like in a minute, or a minute and a half.
Okay. Well, I mean, if Israel bombs Iran, there's the chance of Iran, if they believe that this is it, this is war with the U.S. and Israel, then I believe they could launch a very heavy attack against U.S. bases in the region and cause thousands potentially of American casualties. If they think that it can be limited to them just attacking Israel without the U.S. getting involved, then maybe we'll see some missile strikes on Israel. But Iran has made clear that they are going to make sure there's a consequence if there's any kind of attack, that they'll pull out of the non-proliferation treaty or expel the IAEA inspectors, basically advance their nuclear program more. And then that could be used again to justify more Israeli attacks. So I think it could really open this can of worms that could result in direct war, between the U.S. and Iran, this thing we've all been dreading for many years now because a lot of people have wanted it.
So we've been speaking with Dave DeCamp, editor of antiwar.com, about Israel funding these gangs in Gaza with ties to ISIS, criminal gangs who are actually attacking other Palestinians and Hamas and trying to start some infighting and potential civil war there, which obviously would add to the chaos. But in all this discussion that we've had and about Mike Huckabee's, craziness and how these fringe ideas are now part of the policy of the United States. And on the other side, you have similarly, ideas or policies coming out of the Netanyahu government. When we're having all these discussions, and I bring this back again, these accusations of anti-Semitism, oh, you're picking on little Israel, you just hate the Jews. This is why you're having it. How do you defend yourself? And how should people defend when they, want to criticize the genocide that Israel is doing? And you have about 30 seconds to answer this question. I know it's kind of complicated, but in short, what's the best way to handle that?
Yeah, I mean, I've grown very tired of the accusation, and I don't think anybody that wants to seriously criticize me really hurls that at me anymore. because it's very clear from people familiar with my work that I have no hate in my heart for the Jewish people. And I think that line of attack has become kind of more absurd, even though on the national level we're seeing all this anti-Semitism legislation. I mean, one thing also I point to is that so many Jewish Americans are involved in the pro-Palestine movement in the U.S. and involved in these protests that they call anti-Semitic. And it is, very clearly we're criticizing a government that is doing a very horrific thing at the moment. So if you call someone like Miss Rachel, this child YouTube star, anti-Semitic or question if she's funded by Hamas, I really think that's hurting their side, making those accusations.
We'll leave it at that. Dave DeCamp, thank you for joining us. This has been True Talk on WMNF Tampa. Have a great weekend, everyone. The Scoop is on next.